So minorities after Lausanne is basically the general heading of this session. And starting this panel with my brother Baskın is a great source of happiness for me because the issue of minorities in Turkey. So people who deal with minorities, they first look at the books of Baskın Oran if you are interested in these areas. Baskın is an academic, but at the same time he is a public intellectual. He's a very important personality. Not everybody would know this, and by looking at the notes provided to me, in the junta regimes of 1971 and 80s, he was banned from universities for 9 years, so he is such a member of the faculty. And every time he had to deal with some legal cases against him. So in spite of all these tensions and conflicts, he continued with his academic work and production, and Western Thrace and Turkish minorities in that region. He first started to study on them, and then he extended the scope of his studies. And in the past months, he focused on the violations of Lausanne together with his student Ali Dayıoğlu. He published a book on that particular subject matter and how Turkey violated Lausanne and where and how Greece violated Lausanne. So it's basically a scorecard of the both countries. In addition to these, Baskın Oran has many publications which are provided as part of the courses at universities, the position of minority, the minority law. So he has some studies and work on these areas as well. That's why Baskın Oran will take the floor first. And Brother Baskın, you now may start your presentation. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I would like to greet everyone. And as I begin my speech, I would like to thank my dear friend Ayhan for his kind remarks. And the general attributes of Lausanne. Let me begin with this. There are two features of this. The first is that it's the founding treaty of Turkey, because states are established with international recognition, and this means July 24th, 1923 for Turkey. So the Turkish delegation that went to Lausanne, their name was Turkish Grand National Assembly Government Delegation, and upon its return, it became the Turkish delegation. The Republic, which is a type of regime, was established approximately 3 months after this date, on October 29th, 1923. Another feature is that Lausanne is the only peace treaty that is still in force among those who ended the World War I. The reason for this is that Lausanne was neither a victory nor a defeat for both parties. We owe it to both sides. Peace treaties that result in victory for one side and defeat for the other side do not last long. For example, Versailles in 1919, for example, Sèvres in 1920. So Mustafa Kemal acted realistically and aimed for a compact state whose borders could easily be protected. But in addition to this, we owe this situation to the fact that Lausanne ended not one, but 2 wars. So 2 wars were ended. The First World War, in which the Turks were defeated, and the War of Independence, in which the Turks won. But let me immediately add that when we say state here, we need to make a point in terms of minorities. A nation state was established in accordance with the conditions of the period. It shouldn't be confused with the national state. The main feature of this type of state is to deny the identities of those outside the dominant ethno-religious group in the country. So it means assimilating those who can be assimilated and ethno-religiously cleansing those who cannot be assimilated. In the Middle East and the Balkans, due to the nation system, the millet system, which continues to be the operating system of the Muslim brain today, the Hanafi, Sunni, Muslim, and Turkish element, is the dominant nation. And it tries to ethno-religiously cleanse the non-Muslim, who are the condemned nation. They attempted to assimilate non-Kurdish Muslims as well. The group in which this assimilation has been successful only to some extent is the Kurds. We will return here again. Of course, such a policy of the nation state will result in Turkey violating minority rights in Lausanne as a whole. Now let's see these rights, but before mentioning an important difference between Sayre and Lausanne, like this. So two important issues in the Treaty of Sayre. This wasn't even included in Lausanne. The first is Greater Armenia, the second is Kurdistan. So when we talk about Greater Armenia, it wasn't included in Lausanne. It was because during the negotiations in Lausanne, for a period of 2.5 months, a break was provided. And in that particular period, Izmir Economic Congress was held. So it was basically a clear message. It was that we will remain in the capitalist camp. So the Allies were convinced that the new Turkey would not be Bolshevik. Therefore, the Allies no longer needed a buffer state such as Greater Armenia against Soviet Russian communism. And on the other hand, it shouldn't be forgotten that the Armenian population in this region decreased significantly after the massacres of 1915 and 1916. In fact, Ankara's instructions to the delegation that went to Lausanne had two definitive articles that if these were not achieved, the negotiations would be terminated, capitulations would be abolished, and Armenian homeland is out of the question. As for Kurdistan, so this historical region was previously divided in the 17th century, and it wasn't really included in Lausanne either. So still, Kurds participated in the War of Independence and acted together with Ankara during Lausanne. The reasons for this become clear when we examine the conditions of that day. But let us first see the section 3 titled Protection of Minorities, and we will come to the reasons of that later. So even though its title is like this, the protection of minorities, the rights foreseen or stipulated in section 3 are brought not only to non-Muslims who are considered minorities, but a total of 4 categories. Category first is Turkish citizens belonging to non-Muslim minorities. Category 2, Turkish citizens who speak a language other than Turks. Category 3, all Turkish citizens. Category 4, everyone residing in Turkey. So this is the listing that we have. So whoever have more rights, it's been arranged accordingly. Therefore, section 3, despite its heading, despite its title, it's not only a minority rights instrument, but it's also a human rights instrument. This is because the term human rights was only introduced into international instruments in 1945. Among these groups, non-Muslims have 2 privileges. The first is they have the broadest rights. The second is that these rights are guaranteed by the League of Nations, an international guarantee, and the rights of other minorities aren't guaranteed within the scope of the League of Nations guarantee. By the way, before I forget, it should be added that many educated people, but by educated I quote and unquote, educated people in Turkey think that these rights are only brought to Greeks, Armenians and Jews. However, their names aren't even mentioned in this section. Rights were brought to Turkish citizens, non-Muslims. In other words, these rights concern all non-Muslims who are citizens. The rights and violations of each of these four categories can be explained as follows, starting with non-Muslims who have the broadest rights. So category first, Turkish citizens belonging to non-Muslim minorities. By the way, Article 14, we need to cite it. Local autonomy for Imbros and Bozcaada is granted in Article 14. And if you would like to find out more about local autonomy, I will describe it later. So these two islands have been colonized with the people from the Black Sea. Well, Article 38, but all articles, they cannot be amended in either way, and prohibition of discrimination, freedom of religion and worship, freedom of movement and migration is granted under Article 38, and this is why it is the broadest provision article of this treaty, and this also applies to human rights today, not only to that particular period. And the rights of non-Muslims have been violated. So in 1925, for example, non-Muslims in Istanbul were subjected to permission to travel outside the provincial border. After 1927, Syriac schools were closed, and 1934 Jewish exile in Thrace happened. 20 Lots incident happened in 1941. Wealth tax was introduced in 1942, and September pogroms in 1955. And in 1964, non-citizen Istanbul Greeks who were established in Istanbul were deported. Citizen Speak Turkish campaigns were carried out in the 1930s and 60s. And regarding the 1936 declaration, and in the 1970s, non-Muslim foundation properties were confiscated with the scandalous decisions of the Supreme Court, and Protestant missionaries were blocked and even imprisoned. And these are all among the violations of material violations of Article 38. Article 39 is about the right to enjoy the same civil and political rights as Muslims. However, there is an exception, Berk Acar, who was appointed district governor in 2022. Still, there are no non-Muslim civil servants, especially no members of the police and the military forces. Article 40 relates to the right to establish, manage, and control at their own expense all kinds of institutions, and to use their own language in them and to perform their own religious ceremonies. These were violated as well. In 1927, schools were effectively shut down in Imbros and Bozcaada in order to take it outside the scope of reciprocity, with a reference to the former panelist. So patriarchal and elections have always been interfered with. Students were forced to attend Islamic religious classes. In 1971, Halki Seminary was closed, and we still don't have an ongoing practice there. As for Article 41, the right to receive education in their mother tongue, and there is a right to receive a fair share from various budgets from the state and municipalities. However, the payment of allocation of these budgets have been stopped. It started again in 2013 and 16 with the decision to encourage private schools, and then was terminated again in 2019. To add immediately, under the influence of interwar environment, the guarantor Western countries didn't pay attention to these violations. So much so that even after the flight of approximately 1 million Anatolian Greeks to Greece in 1922, and the population exchange happened with Greece in 1921, which led to the departure of 190,000 Greeks. And while the rate of non-Muslims was 2.4% in the first census in 1927, today it is less than 1 per thousand. Category 2, Turkish citizens who speak a language other than Turkish. The right to oral defense in courts in their own language, Article 39, subparagraph 5, and we will come to this right below in the Kurds section. Category 3, all Turkish citizens. Differences in religion and belief will not lead to any discrimination according to the article. The right to freely use any language they want as they wish. And I will come to this in the Kurds section again.
Category 4, everyone residing in Turkey, the right to equality before the law, regardless of nationality, language, race, or religion. It can be thought that the Allies put this in place to protect their own citizens, Levantines, who had been trading in the Ottoman Empire for centuries. But today, Levantines, for example, do not have the right to open schools. Yazidis, Alevis, everyone actually falls within this category, but Levantines, like I said, they do not have the right to open schools. Now, we can return to the Kurdish issue. One, as we have seen above, the Kurds participated in the 1922 War of Independence and acted together with Ankara in Lausanne. Why? Because first of all, Mustafa Kemal Pasha had emphasized the Islamic unity between Turks and Kurds. In 1919 Erzurum and Sivas Congresses, 1919 Amasya meeting, 1920 National Pact, and in the Turkish Grand National Assembly discussions. And in particular, 21 Constitution that states that the provinces are autonomous. And especially where it says that this created the opportunity for Kurds to govern themselves autonomously in the provinces where they were the majority. At least as importantly, the Kurds' participation in the War of Independence was due to the Greater Armenia project, which was also mentioned in Sevr, which we mentioned previously, because the borders of the Greater Armenia project, which was planned in the north of eastern Anatolia and stretched from Artvin to Giresun in the west, and then went down to the south and included Erzincan, Erzurum, Muş, and Van, would be finalized by US President Wilson. And of course, the further south this border goes, autonomous Kurdistan, which was promised very loosely in Sevr, would shrink that much. In fact, the Kurds were the judged nation and the Armenians were the condemned nation. In other words, the Greater Armenia project, which gives goosebumps to the Kurds, has pushed these people to Ankara's side. Then, after it became clear that they would take Mosul, British Empire or Britain was no longer interested in the Turkish Kurds. As a matter of fact, as Ismail Beşikçi said, it did not even grant them the status of colonial state, a status it granted to African tribes. The Kurds were already painting a largely organized and dispersed picture anyway. The second reason, Kurds gained language rights in the courts within Category 2, Turkish citizens who speak a language other than Turkish. Article 13.9/5 is as follows. Despite the existence of the official language, Turkish citizens who do not speak Turkish will be provided with adequate facilities to use their own language in own language orally before courts, meaning interpreting and translation. Here, the principle is clearly based on the principle that a person can best defend himself in his native language. However, Turkish courts found a series of justifications to violate this right and prevented Kurdish defenses in courts by interpreting this right as only being granted to those who do not speak Turkish. So much so that in 2010, the main KCK cases were being heard in Diyarbakır High Criminal Court, and the lawyers invited me to the court as an expert to explain this provision of Lausanne Treaty, and I did go to Diyarbakır. However, the delegation decided that the Code of Criminal Procedures Act, Article 178, did not let me talk. And the head of the delegation said, "We know all about Lausanne," and basically did not hear me out. And Kurds gained the broadest language rights within Category 3 as all Turkish citizens. Article 39/4 is as follows. There shall be no restrictions on the free use of any language by any Turkish citizen in private affairs, in commerce, in religion, in the press, in publications, or any kind of public meetings. So logically, except for government offices. On the other hand, and Turgut Tarhanlı is a friend of mine, and I mean, because of the fact that it's a generic term, a general term, Article 39/4 now also cover radio, television, internet, etc. Because generic terms are interpreted according to their broad meanings at the time they are applied, not according to their meanings at the time the text was written. The interesting thing is that this Article 39, it was a joint proposal of the Allied powers and the Turkish Grand National Assembly, but the nation-state has violated the article to a large extent. Kurdish was banned indirectly with the Unification of Education Law on March the 3rd, 1924, and directly with the secret Eastern Reform Plan in September 1925. The nation-state launched citizens speak Turkish campaigns in the 30s and 60s. Those who spoke languages other than Turkish at the marketplaces in eastern Anatolia were fined. As single-party rule took hold, the scope and tone of bans on Kurdish and non-Muslim languages expanded and intensified. The names of 12,211 villages, one-third of the total villages, and 4,000 towns and 4,000 geographical locations were renamed. Kurds and non-Muslims were prohibited from taking surnames that revealed their ethnicity, and speaking one's native language in the market was made a punishable act. Now, let's take a look at the Lausanne violations regarding 39/4. Let's finish by giving just 3 examples from these violations. Some are comical, some tragic. Examples of tragic ones. 29th of March 2017, Tunceli governor, who was appointed to replace Dersim mayor, as an appointed governor, ordered that the bodies of PKK members killed in clashes should not be washed or buried. Battalgazi municipality also refused to wash and bury the body of Kemal Kurkut, who was killed by the police during Nevroz. The police officer who killed Kemal Kurkut was not punished, but the journalist who photographed the moment of the killing was sentenced to prison. 9th of May 2018, Fikret Aydemir from Van, who did his military service in Ağrı, was beaten by his superiors and hospitalized for singing Kurdish folk songs. 30th of November 2022, Kurdish politician İhsan Uğur, who was detained in Diyarbakır prison, was brought back to prison without treatment because he spoke Kurdish in the hospital where he was taken for treatment. And 3 examples of comical ones. 9th of November 2017, a sign that read, "I will not speak Kurdish," was hung on a primary school in Şırnak. The Minister of National Education said that the aim was to prevent children from swearing in Kurdish. 5th of September 2020, a woman in Van was detained for 24 hours because of a yellow, red, and green headscarf, which was found in her bag during a search at a checkpoint in the courthouse. 15th of June 2022, the groom and 9 guests wearing yellow, red, green shawls at a wedding in Esenyurt, Istanbul, were arrested for propaganda for an illegal organization. Yes, this is all I had to say. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler Baskın abi.
Thank you very much, Baskın. This was great. Exactly 20 minutes. And now we're going to proceed with our second speaker, who is Derya Bayır. Derya completed her PhD at Queen Mary University in London, and London School of Economics Contemporary Turkish Studies Award is one of her accolades, and she has also a recipient of Lever Hurme Research Award, and she focuses on human rights, minority rights, diversity, and Turkey's legal and judicial systems, nationalism, Ottoman pluralism, constitutional law, autonomy, and federal state systems, and by linguistic rights. And she has publications under her belt as well. Derya Hanım, you have 20 minutes, please. Thank you.
Derya Hanım'ı bağlayamadık şu anda. David Gaunt'a geçebilir.
Actually, we will continue with David Gaunt because we were not able to connect to Derya. And due to some technical difficulties, and excuse me, Derya, I'm not sure if she unmuted herself. Hello. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. We can hear you now. Hello. All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Ayhan. And we are here for the centenary of the Lausanne Treaty. Thank you very much for extending an invitation to me. I would have loved to be there with you in person in Istanbul, but sadly I could not make it. So here I am online. Before I start with my talk, let me once again also thank the Hrant Dink Foundation for bringing us together, and everyone who worked behind the scenes to make this event possible. And also, everyone who is participating in this conference, and also thank Baskın, Professor Baskın, as well. Now, the title of my presentation, and I think you can see my PowerPoint slides up on the screen. The title of my presentation is "Do Kurds Have Rights in Lausanne?" In Lausanne Treaty. This is the question that I will be tackling today. And as you know, for long years in Kurdish circles, be it legal and academic, many people have actually been talking about this and thinking about this, whether certain rights were granted to Kurdish people in Lausanne. And I think the most comprehensive answer was given by Baskın Oran in his work, in his detailed work. And yes, you talked about this, Mr. Oran, so I'm not going to repeat what was already said. But in today's presentation, I would like to look at certain historical documents and look at this through a legal lens, so to speak. And as I do that, first of all, I am going to talk about what Kurds think about the Lausanne Treaty and how they interpret minority-related articles. And in 25 and 29, two organizations made an appeal to the League of Nations. They actually sent two petitions, and I will tell you about those as well. And in 1920, in the 20s actually, a French original text, the minutes of the Lausanne Treaty meetings, they were published and shared, and we will take a look at those minutes, and we will take a detailed look at the relevant articles and try and understand what all of this means for Kurdish people. For non-jurors, let me say that the minutes of the Lausanne Treaty meetings, the reason why these are important is as follows. Actually, in the according to the Vienna Convention, it is said that a bilateral or multilateral treaty process should should also take into account the minutes and the entire process. And this goes to show that a treaty text or articles, the scope, to understand meaning, you need to look at the preparatory process and what parties said, what they accepted, what they consented to. If there is any conflicts, to solve the conflict, you need to look at these minutes, says the Vienna Convention, or one of the sources would be the preparatory process and related documents. And again, the Vienna Convention says that to interpret a treaty, also there's yet another principle, and this principle is actually all about making sure that articles of the treaty should be assessed within the context of the treaty and with goodwill. This is also emphasized, and this is also seen as an important principle, and this is included in Article 31. But as you know, Turkey is not a party to this Vienna Convention, and that being the case, I mean, this is not binding for Turkey. One might postulate, but here's how we could respond to that. Actually, Turkey may not be a party to this treaty, but these principles are also applicable for Turkey, this Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. And the reason for that is that, especially in international law and since the 20s, the Permanent Council of Justice says that in international law, these two principles are applicable universally. In terms of interpreting treaties, these principles are very much applicable universally. I don't know if you can see my presentation at the minute. We're working on it, and hopefully we will see your slides soon. All right, now let me also tell you a bit about whether rights were granted to Kurds with Lausanne, and let me also tell you about what Kurds think about Lausanne, how they see this treaty, how they perceive it. And self-determination, right to self-determination, is not recognized by Lausanne. And as far as the Kurds are concerned, it is a huge disappointment as a result. And when we look at the implications of Lausanne Treaty, we see other manifestations of this disappointment. And in northern Kurdistan, there were uprisings such as Sheikh Said uprising in 25. Another watershed moment took place. A nationalist Kurdish movement, Kurdish League, actually made an appeal to the League of Nations, and where they complain about the oppression that they suffered. Halit Bedirhan, Mehmet Sedir, these two people signed this petition, and they made a call to the civilized world. And under the pretext of Sheikh Said uprising, massacres are taking place, and you need to act now to stop this, they said. And they made a plea for Kurds to be sort of saved from the Turks, and also because of the fact that Lausanne does not talk about the right to self-determination for Kurds, and because of the fact that they are also not recognized as minorities, there's an objection. And here's what they said in that petition. The Lausanne Peace Treaty resulted in an unprecedented injustice. Kurdish people in their own land cannot enjoy rights of autonomy. The London Conference and Sèvres Treaty said otherwise, but Lausanne document actually is putting Kurdish people in shackles, is to the detriment of Kurdish people, where they cannot enjoy rights that other minorities enjoy in Turkey. So if you could go to the 5th slide, please. But before that, let me also take you back to the 4th slide so that you can all see this letter. This is the letter that Ligue Kurde sent to the League of Nations in 1925. Now, in this letter by Kürt, it is said that minority status is not granted to Kurds, and as such, they cannot enjoy the same rights. And even today, we can say that the Kurds are not seen as a minority, and there's this discourse that is still going on. So it's quite interesting that this was actually raised back in 1921. Maybe if you ask the Kurds today, they wouldn't say that that they're minorities, but in the 20s, Kurds actually felt very much like a minority, and they were not granted the status of a minority, national minority, just like in other European countries. And this is something that they criticized. And in this petition, we see that. And this discourse that of the Kurds that says they're not minority does not really make a lot of sense. Or asking a Kurdish person whether they feel like a minority, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And here's why. When you ask the question to a Kurd, even if they say no, if you ask them whether they would like to enjoy their ethnic rights, cultural rights, linguistic rights, but if you paraphrase your question, they would all say unequivocally, yes, we would like to enjoy these rights. I mean, this is quite apparent, and this goes to show that this question alone is not really indicative in terms of what they want, and it should be taken with a pinch of salt. Let's move on to the sixth slide. Now, let's continue with the Lausanne Treaty, and let me say a few more words about this. When we look at the Lausanne Treaty, we see, yes, it's a huge disappointment for Kurdish people because, these rights were not minority rights were not extended to Kurds. And slide 7. Now, slide 3. Let's go back. My apologies. Now, they had demands to be an independent state, and they do not have minority rights. But also, the reason why Kurds didn't agree with Lausanne was because Lausanne is partitioned because of Lausanne. I mean, that's what many people felt. But when we look at the Lausanne Treaty, we also see that when we look at these articles, we see that the partitioning of Kurdistan, at least on paper, the main culprit is not Lausanne, because when we look at the first section, Article 3 of Lausanne Treaty, from the Mediterranean to Iran, the boundaries of Turkey were drawn based on two things. One is the 21 French-Turkish agreement, and the second one for the Iraqi border, it is the treatment between Turkey and the UK. Lausanne says, sort of postpones this and says in 9 months there will be an agreement between the UK and Turkey, and if they fail to do so, the issue will be seen by the League of Nations. So actually at Lausanne, when we look at Lausanne, we see nothing about partitioning of Kurdistan. There is no explicit article, and like I said, the Syrian border is set by the Turkish-French agreement, and the Iraqi border was actually set based on the agreement between Turkey and the UK. The League of Nations sided with the UK in 26. There was this agreement between the UK and Turkey, this 1926 agreement. And in Lausanne, there is no article that openly talks about the partitioning of the historic region of Kurdistan. Anyway, so this is what Kurds feel about the Lausanne Treaty. But let me also say that, if you could please go to slide number 7, There is yet another approach that needs to be explored, and this is about Kurds feel that the articles pertaining to protection of minorities, some Kurds actually see this as a reference in their pursuit of the exercising of their rights, and these were put to use in national and international platforms. In 2012, for instance, there were a series of incidents. Sadly, we cannot hear you anymore. I think that there's a technical difficulty. And so this is not new, and again, when we look at historical documents and the records of the League of Nations, we see that Kurdish political leaders always had some demands about Lausanne. Last 5 minutes. Well, I was just getting to the real chunk of my presentation. So if you could please be brief. Now, Hoybun sent this letter to the League of Nations, and as you know, Hoybun is in an important Kurdish nationalist organization, and again, we cannot hear the speaker. We apologize.
Derya Hanım, görüntü dondu galiba.
Derya Hanım, sadly we cannot see you or hear you.
4. maddelere dayanması hatalı mıdır? Yani
Derya Hanım'ın bağlantısı koptu. O yüzden bir teknik...
Okay, Derya is disconnected. We have this technical mishap, so let's continue from here. Hello? Hello?
Lütfen devam edin.
Please continue. All right. So I think my connection is back on. And actually, the real question here is as follows: whether these petitions were justified, and whether it made sense to base these demands on the Lausanne Treaty. Now, when we look at the minutes of the Lausanne Conference, we see that in Süreyya's demand, for instance, and Bedirhan's demand, they're quite justified, actually. In Article 38, certain rights are stipulated, and these include the Kurds. And the reason why we know that that is the case is because, first of all, when we look at Lord Curzon, in his speech, we see this to be the case. And this is the exact quote. And here's what he says. Lord Curzon says, the subcommittee on minorities wanted all Muslim minorities such as Kurds and Circassians and Arabs to be added to the list of minorities, whereas the Turkish delegation said that these minorities do not need protection and that they're quite pleased with their conditions. I hope that it continues like this. The subcommittee, depending on this assurance, albeit unwillingly, decided to accept the Turkish point of view, and the subcommittee thought that in Article 2 there is enough protection for these Muslim minorities. I'm not 100% convinced, but I wish them the best, he says.
Alt Komisyonu Başkanı
Likewise, Mr. Montano, who was the UN chair of the subcommittee on minorities, we see similar statements. So according to Mr. Montano, with respect to the protection of minorities, including Muslim minorities and as well as all national, racial, ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities residing in Turkey, he concluded that their applicability towards non-Muslims could be restricted. And this is quite important. There is also this provisional Article 2, which recommends that provided that Turkey guarantees fully and completely the right to life and the right to liberty for all minorities regardless of their language or religion or race. So Mr. Montana makes such a statement based on the fact that Turkey already assured the subcommittee that it will provide full and complete protection. That's why the subcommittee accepted Turkey's argument for restricting some of the rights. So when we look at the second draft article about the protection of minorities as part of the draft prepared by Allied powers, Rıza Nur objected to the wording. So the initial wording of the Allied powers draft read as everyone residing in Turkey, but Rıza Nur rejected and he asked for this term to be replaced by minorities. But Rıza Nur's suggestion is rejected and the text finally comes out with the term or phrase everyone residing in Turkey. So this is once again confirms that these guidelines on protection of minorities in Turkey, they cover everyone. Ms. Derya Bayır, we will much appreciate it if you can wrap it up because time is up. Yes, I understand. I have 3 more slides and I also had some technical hiccups, so I will really appreciate if you can just give me more time. So this is the final report of the subcommittee on minorities. And another point here one needs to mention is the Minorities Treaty of Poland. So there are 2 different categories of rights as part of the minority treaties for Poland. Again, if we are to quote the chair of the subcommittee, Montagno, he makes a reference to the term all residents and all nationals and Turkish nationals. So this gave the impression that there were actually 2 different categories of rights. So if we are to take that statement bluntly, then we can conclude that there is one category of rights for non-Muslim minorities, and then there is another category of rights for Turks. So this is how protection mechanism is working. And we can see that these are also covered by Articles 38 and 39 of the Lausanne Treaty. So these are more like the generic rights. as defined by these provisions. We know that Lausanne Treaty, its text was prepared based on the minority treaties of Poland. So this is where the inspiration came from. And Article 44 of the Lausanne Treaty also confirms that this. Here there are provisions about minorities, and it says only the non-Muslim minorities will be under the guarantee and protection of the League of Nations. So this wording tells us that yes, Lausanne grants some rights, but even if they are not under the protection or under the guarantee of international community, there are still some generic rights applicable to citizens. And this is my last slide about the Lausanne Treaty, Article 39, paragraph 5. Here we have the Allied Powers draft as well as another draft submitted by the Turkish delegation. When we look at the draft submitted by the Allied Powers on 15th of December 1922, according to that, Turkish citizens who speak language other than Turkish language, they will be provided the right to defend themselves in Turkish court in their own language, and necessary arrangements will be made in order to ensure that. So this is what is written in the draft text of the Allied Powers, whereas in the text provided by Turkish delegation, it says, regardless of the official language, regardless of the existence of official language, Turkish citizens who use languages other than Turkish language, they will be provided with necessary means so that they can use their own languages before the court. So there is a different formulation. In order to convince the Allied powers, the Turkish delegation had to include this bold phrase which reads as regardless of the official language. So this has also been some sort of commitment on the part of Turkey in order to convince Allied powers that it will live up to its commitment with respect to minorities. And ultimately, the proposal by the Allied powers to have this expression, the ability to use languages other than Turkish language in written form. So this tangible proposal by the Allied powers, it was taken from the draft. It was removed. And ultimately, Turkey proposes to also remove the expression regardless of the official language, citing that this would be bringing prejudice to the national sovereignty of the country, and finally convinces the Allied powers. So this is how Turkey managed to basically get away with the text and convince the Allied powers to remove all their suggested phrases. And of course this has been used as a very strong argument throughout the Republic. And of course this also constitutes a clear violation of acting in good faith and living up to the legal commitments, which is of course one of the main pillars of the Lausanne Treaty. By the way, the Allied powers suggestion was not only limited to that, because once Turkish citizens who are not necessarily Turkish speakers, if they are granted this right, then this would also bring some positive liabilities on the part of the government. So for those Turkish citizens who do not use Turkish or who are not competent of Turkish, who do not know Turkish, they could be provided with the right to have a translator who might help translation during the court defense statement. Moderator warns the speaker to wrap up. So, in conclusion, Kurds were quite disappointed because of the Lausanne Treaty. But on the other hand, they saw this violation of rights as an opportunity to base their arguments and to also continue their struggle to prove their case to the international community. There were some rights granted to Kurds by Lausanne Treaty. Those were generic rights granted under Articles 38 and 39, and not only to Kurds, but all other minorities. Even though Turkey provided assurances that rights of all minorities will be guaranteed, including Kurds. That's why Kurds were not really defined as minorities, and Turks as such were deprived of their minority rights. But as Turkey did not abide by its commitments arising from the Lausanne Treaty, and it also did not live up to all the international commitments, this constitutes a violation, a grave violation of the principle Pax Sunt Servanda of the Lausanne Treaty. With that, I would like to apologize for speaking beyond my time. Yes, we can now move to our third panelist, our dear friend David Gaunt. Mr. Gaunt is a professor of history at the Center for Baltic and East European Studies at Södertörn University, Stockholm, Sweden. He has extensively written on the history of Assyrian Christians and their neighbors in Anatolia. His most prominent work was translated by Belge Publishing in 2006, Massacres, Resistance, Protectors, Muslim-Christian Relations in Eastern Anatolia during World War I. And another book he co-edited, Let Them Not Return, Sifo, the Genocide Against the Assyrian, Syriac, and Chaldean Christians in the Ottoman Empire, was published in 2017. His most recent book, written together with Giulietta Rotaru, is The Wallachian Gold Washers. Mr. Gaunt is a member of Academia Europaea.
And thank you.
So, thank you, Hrant Dink Vakfi, for inviting me to come. It's my favorite Vakfi of all time. Your conferences are always so interesting and broad and enriches me. And it also gives me an opportunity to talk about Assyrians, which I have hardly ever seen mentioned in normal books about Ottoman history or even the Republic of Turkey, so a very obscure people. My presentation, I have written it up, so if anyone wants to get it because I have a feeling that I may not be able to talk about everything inside it. I can send it to you. So now I will not be talking very much about Lausanne, but rather the reaction of the Syrian Orthodox religious leaders to the concept of becoming a minority, right. So this is a very complicated history in which the leadership for the Syrian Orthodox Church goes a flip-flop from one position of wanting to be part of an autonomous Assyrian country, or at least in an autonomous zone within Kurdistan at one time, to 180 degrees changing and wanting to be Turks and insisting upon it. So this is not an easy topic to research because the Assyrians were very good at hiding, doing what we call the art of not being governed, which means that the government was not much interested in them either. They weren't worth the investment in money and in military in order to put them under control. So we have very few intellectuals, and those few intellectuals were seldom inside Turkey, but in diaspora. The narrative of this history will be then of religious leaders. Now, up to this point, we have talked about two kinds of minorities. One, a minority which inside Turkey sometimes has rights, and sometimes they are very limited, and sometimes they don't exist at all. This is from the legal point of view of the Turkish official interpretation of minorities, which I find a bit eccentric, to the point of manipulative and perverse. And then we have the reality of real minorities that are not respected at all, not even sometimes, and not even limited. In the case of the Syrian Orthodox, I would say that the crucial point is that they didn't get even the most limited kind of rights, was that they were not heavily represented in Istanbul like the Armenians and the Greeks and the Jews were, but were mostly in an enclave out in Mardin and Midyat area. Okay, the basic story is that immediately after the First World War was over, was a period in which the Syrian Orthodox Church really wanted to be part of an autonomous area free from Turkish control. They presented a long list that they have made of the losses of their church, amounting to about 90,000 people killed, among them 6 bishops, 154 priests, and a lot of destroyed villages, mostly in the Diyarbakir and Siirt area. They demanded to be part of an Assyrian state. There would be the vilayets of Diyarbakir, Mosul, the Sanjaks of Urfa, Deir Zor, and a little bit of Iran as well. Very strange. This is probably an exaggeration, but the number of bishops, 6 being killed, that probably is not an exaggeration. So they were being targeted as a religious group by their neighbors and some military as well. we figure that there were about 20 to 30,000 remaining Syriani in the Middle East, many displaced in other, outside of that would be Turkey, but some were trickling back slowly to their villages, helped sometimes by friendly Kurds. The Syriac representative here at the Paris Peace Treaty was the Archbishop of Syria by the name of Afram. He was the only archbishop in that church that could speak French. Shows the lack of intellectual power. They called themselves a delegation, the Assyro-Chaldean delegation, and they worked very hard with lobbying the diplomats and the negotiators, but it fell on deaf ears. In the end, they got nothing. There was a mention in the Sèvres, but so nothing actually happened. This led the patriarch to begin to change his mind about insisting on its own country, and at the same time the nationalists, the Turkish nationalist military was winning more and more territory from the Greeks and from the French. So they went to Plan B, which was a traditional loyalty to whatever government there was in power and keeping your head down. No longer demanding any independence, the patriarch began getting into the role of the leader of a millet. And it was interpreted also, I mean, even if he just made a mention in the newspaper that he wanted to be a Turk and he didn't want to be a part of a minority, it was accepted as an official statement. In a way, this was a realization that was very realistic. The patriarch realized that the survivors would eventually become part of a Turkish state, and that if he was in conflict with the state, these people would be in danger. This is change of face has led to a lot of bitter discussion within the Syriac diaspora, and even inside Turkey. The patriarch met several times with Kemal and the leaders and made statements to newspapers of the type that we are Turks. So ethnically Turks. We don't want to be a minority. We want to be citizens. And I suppose this is against the background of what was going on in Lausanne. Right. Well, if you remember the Sykes-Picot agreement, if you're a historian, you know that Mardin and its area was supposed to be French in the zone. But the first person to come to Mardin was a representative of the British military. And the patriarch told him, no, we don't want to be part of a British controlled area. We want to stay inside Turkey. When the French, a few months later, arrived, also saying that we'd like to take over here, the patriarch refused to even meet with them. So this was also not boots on the ground, but the opposite. In addition, the patriarch warned those Syriacs who were in Urfa and Adana not to cooperate with the Armenians and the French in fighting against the Turkish nationalist forces. saying that this is against the interests of our community. And on top of that, even though they had presented this long list of deaths and losses in 1919, they began to deny that anything had happened to the church, which was a great tragedy and has made it almost impossible until about 2013 to talk in church buildings about the genocide. I won't tell you about some of the Syriacs who joined Sheikh Said's rebellion and Hajjo's rebellion, but it's in the paper that you can get if you ask me. I will conclude by saying something that what I describe here, not in this bouillon cube of my oral presentation, but in the book, the text itself, that despite all of the pledges of loyalty that the Patriarch gave to the Kemalist government, he was forced into exile in 1924. We don't know actually if he was ordered out of the country or that he just sort of went across the border and never got to come back, or whatever it was, but he was stripped of his Turkish citizenship, and he had to find a new patriarchal seat in Damascus. This meant that he was far distant from the survivors who were still in Turkish territory and couldn't go back. As the leader of the church, and even his second in command, who had actually made the list of deaths, they were humiliated, of course. Having to deny that which all of the survivors knew, created internal divisions. You have your family memories, and then you have the official statements of your church leaders saying that it didn't happen. Right, okay. And this denialism, which was internal within the church, meant that research and even discussions, normal discussions, about what happened during World War I within the Syriac community just didn't happen. And this has contributed to the very, very late recognition, compared with that which happened to the Armenians, of a genocide. And I have a fourth point that I didn't even write down, and so I will finish here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David.